Welcome to the second episode of the News Project Live, a weekly conversation with media industry experts and innovators about the future of news, brought to you by the News Project. This week's episode is going to focus on the perilous state of the newspaper industry with two very special guests, Mike Klingensmith, publisher and CEO of the Star Tribune, and Ken Doctor, president of Newsonomics. Our hosts for this show are Merrill Brown, CEO of the News Project, and Alex Leo, head of audience. Without further ado, Merrill Brown and Alex Leo.
Thank you, and good evening. I'm Merrill Brown in New York City, and welcome to the second episode of the News Project Live. Thursday evenings, we bring you important guests and provocative conversation about news business challenges, those faced by many of us working in the evolving news ecosystem. Tonight, we'll talk about the newspaper industry's peril, but in other programs, we'll address issues in local news and national news, on text, on video and audio, new revenue and technology ideas, and important innovation, and of course, COVID-19. At our company, the News Project, we're working to build technology and services to help small to medium-sized news organizations address these product and business challenges. We provide them advice and capabilities. We help news operations get into position to seek sustainable business models. More on our work a little later in the program when co-host and Alex, Leo, and I debrief. And please send us questions for tonight's program. Good evening, Alex. And how's everything in Washington, D.C.?
We're good here, Merrill, and hi, and thank you for joining us tonight, everyone. Please share this stream on Facebook and Twitter. We're live on YouTube. Put us on LinkedIn and send us your questions, as Merrill says. Tell us where you're joining from. We can't wait to talk more.
Thanks, Alex. To our show tonight, as you heard, joining us tonight to talk about the newspaper industry situation from Minneapolis are Mike Klingensmith, the innovative CEO and publisher of the Star Tribune there, and from Santa Cruz, California, Ken Doctor, president of Newsonomics and a preeminent newspaper industry analyst. Ken has been writing about the industry's collapse even before the COVID-19 catastrophe that has accelerated the industry's free fall. And just the other day, Ken said of the virus-related collapse of advertising for some publishers, quote, "This seems like for them, truly it is the full extinction event. I don't know how they come back," Ken wrote. Mike recently said the stronger independent newspaper like Seattle, ours, the Boston Globe, and ones with massive subscription numbers at high rates, they're going to come out fine, Mike said. But when you get to the medium newspapers that are struggling, I'm sure you'll see an acceleration of print days being canceled and newsrooms reduced. But Klingensmith says we should not expect frequency delays or changes at his paper. We'll see, and we'll hear from Mike about that. So a warm welcome to Mike and Ken. Thank you for joining us today. To the first question, Mike, tell us about the state of things as your daily newspaper deals with both the industry challenge and COVID-19.
Thanks very much, Merrill. Thanks for having me on this broadcast. The Star Tribune has been working hard. I've been there for 10 years, so this is my 10th year as publisher, and we've been working hard over that 10-year period to build and rebuild our business from a financial restructuring that was back in 2009, right before I came on board. And we've had a lot of success, and our two missions have been to diversify our revenue stream increasingly away from advertising and towards consumer revenue, and secondly, obviously, to accelerate the diversification out of print and into digital. We were having great success with that. Our business has stabilized in recent years. I would say that we sort of have made it back to being a normal business with relatively stable revenues and earnings. And in the first quarter of this year, in fact, we were having a terrific start to the year. And I'm hearing this across other media properties as well, but we were, in fact, through the first quarter of this year, which even included a couple COVID-affected weeks, our earnings, our EBITDA was up 53% from last year. So we were feeling very good about things around March 15th. What happened immediately after that, of course, is that the COVID situation burst onto the scene. Print advertising started canceling. We lost 50% of our print advertising almost overnight. That was booked for the second quarter. Our digital advertising declined by 30%, but our traffic skyrocketed. And you could put up that first slide. These are just the raw data. So we're the 12th largest metro in the country. And so that just a city of metro area, about 3 million people. We had a 38.7% increase in page views in the month of April. This compares to a year earlier. We had a 43% increase in visits to 32.6 million visits, and a 27% increase in unique visitors to 12.3 million. Mobile just exploded, 66% increase in mobile visits from 5.4 million to 13.6 million. So the franchise everybody reinforced for us our position in the community, the importance of our news and information. We go to the next slide. I'll show you, this is the percentage of our content that was COVID-19 content, the green being COVID-19, blue being all other. And in that middle period, late March, early April, we had as much as 80% of the interactions with our content was on COVID-19 stories. That's settled back now to about the 60% range, but you can see that it was all about COVID-19 in terms of reader interest. And then the next page, as a result of the increase in traffic, this is what happened with digital subscriptions. So week 12 there is the first week of April. You can see it started in March. Green is last year, red is this year. You can see a quadrupling of our weekly digital subscription sales as of week 12 and through the full month of April. It's settling now down at around double the level of a year ago. So at the same time, we've lost about 40% of our ad revenue in the second quarter. We're up about 30% year over year in digital subscriptions. So I think
So in brief, Mike, prospects were very good going into the new year. And in a world that Ken writes about in terms of the disasters all around us, sum up for me the secret to making it work.
Well, we've stayed completely focused on our mission. The newsroom has hit the ground running on this. We're providing, I think, unprecedented levels of coverage. It proves to us that the resource that we have in our newsroom is really the engine that drives our business. And we feel really good about where we are right now, given the situation.
Oh, thanks,
and you're
Mike.
One of the, sorry, I just wanted to jump in there, Merrill, and I want to get to Ken. But Mike, one of the reasons you were able to do that is because you haven't laid off your newsroom, right? There hasn't been mass layoffs or furloughs at your company?
Yeah, so we have about 240 people in our newsroom, and that number is almost identical to 10 years ago when I joined. We have at times during those 10 years had a buyout or two, but we have not laid off anyone in that decade. We've had turnover, obviously, people retire, people leave, but we replace those people. Sometimes we replace them in sort of different skill sets than the people who left, but we have a relatively vibrant, in fact, very, very vibrant newsroom.
And I have to add to that while I have saluted the great work that Mike and the Star Tribune has done over these years, it has grilled me a little because I spent 10 years of my career in St. Paul across the river. And when I left in 1997, we had 225 FTEs in the newsroom. Close to what Star Tribune has now. I think Star Tribune had over 400 at that point. And the Alden-owned paper across the river is now down to fewer than 50. So the capacity that Mike is talking about is absolutely a gating principle to the success they're having right now with digital subscription. And I think that's really important to point out.
So Ken, let's put that into the national context of big groups and the others you're covering, where the picture is not only not rosy, but in many ways cataclysmic.
Yeah. So the big picture is we have seen financialization and consolidation for most of the last 15, 18 months. And of course, this isn't a new phenomenon, but it's been accelerating. And what I pointed to in the COVID coverage since in the last 2 months of our lives here is that COVID is likely to accelerate the further consolidation and financialization of the newspaper chains. And we have seen just in recent weeks, McClatchy will come out of bankruptcy probably in about mid-July, likely to go to a financial player. And Alden Global is closing in on Tribune, which would make that part of another financial company. Overall, those big trends are continuing. I think, as you pointed out in the intro, as Mike said, the companies that are best positioned, that means private ownership largely, it means capacity, long-term vision, they will make it through here, although it's going to be difficult for them, but they'll make it through. The other companies, in a word, the forecast is smaller revenues, smaller staffs, and really smaller news products for all the democracies across America, just as we head into another election. That's clearly what we're facing for the next 18 months, 2 years, maybe longer at this point. And it's not a new phenomenon. Of course, we've seen this since really the Great Recession, but it is now going to be more pronounced. We will have frequency reductions, which are not necessarily bad, but we have companies that are going to be cutting 2, 3, 4, 5 days of print, and really their newsroom staffs are not resourced for, or their business staffs are not ready for, and their readers are unprepared for going digital. So this is going to be the next thing on the landscape. I think I'm looking at the further consolidation on the one hand, day cutting on the other hand, and just smaller overall. Now, there's a couple of slides from FTI, which is one of the main consulting companies in our industry, and I think they do a very good job and both very accurate and very sober. And if you look at this chart, you can see the forecasting they're doing of where the industry was headed and where it may be headed, depending on whether there is the U-shaped recovery or the V-shaped recovery. And you can see here various percentages of loss. I won't read them, but percentages of loss. Preprints, I understand, leads the parade of loss for most of the companies. But the most stunning statistic out of it is that a fifth of advertising or more would be permanently lost through this recession. And that is the same number of what the industry lost in 2008, 2009. And if we go on to the next one, there's one more slide there, which I think is very indicative and also instructive of the Star Tribune's relative success, the kind of success that I've been able to report of, say, the New York Times. This is all a math problem in a way. The audience, as we've seen, is really appreciating the deep COVID coverage that some newspapers have been able to provide, and the payoff in digital subscriptions is worthwhile, a real testimony to the work of those journalists. But this is a math problem. It's a business model problem, and it has been for a decade. And if you look here, this is how FTI is looking at pre-COVID on the left, post-COVID on the right. And basically, we have more dependence on print. And the dirty little secret of the industry has been a continued reliance on print. Now, 25 years into the digital revolution, that's the problem. The more you can get to digital revenue and to reader revenue, the better you will fare.
Ken, are we going to continue to lose newspapers?
Yeah, in fact, in the Star Tribune today, by chance, a story, and Owen Van Essen, who is with Dirks Van Essen, the leading broker, newspaper broker, buyer and selling agent in the business, was quoted in the Star Tribune. I will read the sentence. There are 200 to 300 small weekly newspapers that will not be around at the end of the year. And as many as 500 newspapers will reduce their publication schedule this year. So that problem is twofold. Number one, papers just go away. And I don't know how many people have asked me over the years, when will the newspaper go away? And that is a problem, and it's very easy to say here, not here. But the bigger problem is what I've pointed to as ghost newspapers that keep on publishing, but really have very few journalists doing the reporting. They've got a few ads left. They've got the mortuary ads, and they have the legals ads, but they're pretending to be news. It's almost faux news. And there's going to be more and more ghost newspapers across the country.
Alex, you have a question for the guest?
Yeah, I was going to ask about, both of you mentioned, both Mike and Ken mentioned the mix of revenue strategies. And I'm fascinated by how important that is and what that mix looks like now. I mean, I know since the COVID era, advertising has declined, but even beforehand, it seems like that's one of the important parts of this going forward.
That's right. And Mike, we talked.
Mike is muted.
Yeah, okay.
Oh.
Have you unmuted me now? Thank you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
In fact, if you put up the last slide that I have, I'll show you what the revenue mix looks like for the Star Tribune.
Great.
You're not expected to read the numbers, by the way, but colors. So if you look at the dark green on the bottom, that's print advertising. And the middle bar here is our 2020 budget. And this is pre-COVID, obviously. So it goes back 5 years and forward 5 years. If you go back 5 years, you'll see the height of the brighter green bar, and you'll see that is print advertising. Today, that's down to 24% of our mix. So losing half of our print advertising only affects advertising by total revenue by 12%. That's an important thing to keep in mind. The blue bars is digital advertising. And you can see that it looks like here, by our projections, next year, the gains annually in digital ad revenue should offset the losses in print ad revenue. The lighter bar is what we call hybrid circulation. These are print subscribers who have digital access as part of their print subscription. That number for us has been absolutely flat over 10 years. We've maintained the revenue by increasing prices as volumes declined. The lighter blue, bar above that is our digital ad revenue. So when digital ad revenue, or digital circulation revenue, when the digital circulation revenue is added to the print circulation revenue, even today, that's already more than 50% of our revenue stream. And in total, will be growing as digital subscriptions outpace the loss of print revenue over the next few years. And then the top kind of salmon colored is other revenue for us. That's printing and distributing other newspapers. And you can see that's declined as the volumes of those print products have declined. But the important takeaway here is you see the stack, pre-COVID, admittedly, flattens right around this year. And so whereas total revenues had been declining for us by maybe 2-3% a year, our forecast, we had high confidence that our revenues were leveling and in fact had a chance to grow. So that shows the effect just purely by the increase in the mix of digital advertising and digital circulation.
And I think that mix is absolutely crucial, and that chart tells a huge story. And it's almost a musical chairs moment. If you reach the level that Mike has reached, and too few, but others have reached, then it's easier to get through this period. If you have not reached it, that math doesn't work very well, and you have to cut more, and that's what we're seeing.
Yeah,
Alex, you wanted to talk to our
long build to get the digital subscription volume going. And this week we just passed 100,000 digital subscribers, which is, I think, still maybe second only to certainly to Boston, who's very strong, 160, 170,000. And I think the LA Times may have more as well, but we're pretty high up the chart in terms of digital subscriptions.
Fascinating.
Alex, you wanted to greet our audience, I think?
Yes, I just wanted to remind all of our viewers to type in their questions and comments. We'll put them up on the screen and we'll ask them to Ken and Mike. And please tell us where you're watching from, tag your friends. And Merrill, before we moved on, I wanted to get everyone to understand a little bit about what TNP is about. Can you tell us in a minute?
in even less than a minute, 20 seconds on our company. We are a startup company that's committed to helping small and medium-sized newsrooms grow in the context of the tools, capabilities, strategic advice, and platform they need. We work with newspapers. We work with startups. We are happy to invite people to contact us, but our fundamental mission is to provide all the help we can give to the next generation of newsrooms, which, for better or for worse, are going to be small, they're going to be local, they're going to be about important vertical topics, and our mission at the News Project is to help them gain sustainable business models around their operations. So thanks, Alex, for giving me that opportunity.
Of course.
I'd like to take the discussion, Alex, actually to your hometown, where finally the future of local news is a political topic. It's taken a while to get it there, but there's now an enormous amount of attention in DC going to whether the federal government should finance local news and help struggling daily newspapers make it. Mike, I don't think you'll need that money. You're one of the lucky ones with a wealthy backer. But what's your view of Washington entering the news business?
I'm not in favor of direct subsidies to news from the government, and I wouldn't look to that. I think it presents just the obvious inherent conflict that we're supposed to be the watchdogs of government. I do believe that in this current moment, there is definitely a role, just a financing role. Programs like the Paycheck Protection Plan, which I think can help bridge some people through just the second quarter crisis. In fact, we aren't eligible because we are affiliated with other companies that our owner has, but were we eligible, we would definitely apply for such a loan.
Ken, obviously, Mike's view is, I think it's fair to say, a minority view within the leadership of the newspaper industry, who are pressing Washington to get a piece of the $3 trillion program announced by House Democrats the other day and the other stimulus programs. What's your view, and what do you think is going to happen?
Well, I share the trepidation about the program. As a journalist in America, we know that the separation of the press from the government and the First Amendment has been so vital to both the independence of the press, having the press do what it can do, and to the critique of government. It worries me that a weakened press can grow more dependent on whatever kind of government largesse comes along. I'm most interested in the kinds of things, I agree with Mike in terms of short-term programs that are really not newspaper specific, like payroll protection. And I think you can look at programs like CPB, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, that has funded NPR and PBS and produced a lot of news for NPR. The question there is the number of layers that were created over time to depoliticize that process. So it is possible to do. I'm more interested in ones that kind of to connect some dots here of the ownership that has allowed Mike to manage the Star Tribune as he has, of how do we incent ownership like that? And I've talked with Frank Blethen, who I know is close to Mike in terms of their work together. He is the owner and publisher of Seattle Times. He's talking about how tax law could be changed to incent the local ownership of newspapers. And I think that offers some possibility here. I think there should be largely outside government funding. And we really need to look at the one model that is working, which is the newspapers that Mike talked about in Minneapolis and in Boston and in Charleston and in Los Angeles and Seattle. And these are people with capacity who also share a civic mission. The question is, how do we get more people, whether they are billionaires or less than that, to invest in the future of the local press and build capacity?
Thank you so much. And I want to thank JC Harp watching us on Twitter for his question that spurred some of this about NPR and PBS and the expansion of this model. I want to say thank you to Sharon Waters and Catherine Taylor, who are watching from Bloomfield, New Jersey and Boston, respectively. And I wanted to get to one question. There's been from Chris Nolan. Question for Mike and Ken. There's been some talk that publishers are taking this downtime as a way to clean up their digital ad tech stack. Are you seeing this as well? And what impact will that have on programmatic ad sales?
Mike, you want to take it?
I don't claim to be an ad tech person here, so I'm not going to be able to answer that. I will say, however, that the programmatic world, one of the problems for us has been, and you saw that chart, that percentage of our engagement that's around COVID content, and particularly at the outset, advertisers were not willing to run their ads against COVID content, which is the reason that we lost 30% of our digital advertising in the second quarter. I think people are getting their heads wrapped around that and thinking about it more correctly now. But the programmatic infrastructure was a problem for us in the early days of the onset of this.
And I can't add a lot of detail to Chris's direct question, but I think that the changes in advertising sales are going to be really interesting to watch. So we've seen in the newsrooms, we've seen sports reporters and entertainment reporters laid off because there aren't events. And with society shut down, we saw a lot of ad salespeople furloughed at a lot of companies.
Right.
And this, I think, furthers the trend against outside sales, more inside sales. But also, and this brings us back to Star Tribune again, I've seen, reader revenue, which I have extolled and advocated that people put more effort into, is great. But advertising needs to remain a really strong secondary source. And to me, that continues to work. You got to find places where Facebook and Google are not, and it's based on relationships. I know they've done that in Minneapolis, but they have done it in other cities too. But this is a big, quiet change that's happening in a lot of newspapers where a lot of advertising salespeople are being laid off, and I don't think they're coming back.
Yeah, that's fascinating. And I just wanted to get to your, as a segue here, Ken, you recently wrote about Facebook and Google in the context of the political conversation we were just having, that governments around the world are now trying to get these tech giants to pay news organizations for their content. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what the implications are?
Well, it's happened, and this has been happening for years. The EU was the leader in various cases against Google and the Google dominance in a number of areas there. There were settlements, and there has been a persistent effort. And back when I was with Knight Ridder, literally 22 years ago, we had calls with lawyers talking about, should we try to use the Fair Use Act and say that Google was violating it? The publishers have not done that. And the publishers look at Google and Facebook's tremendous revenues and profits and say, that's our money. Kind of true, kind of not. If we look at it, mathematically, but because of in Australia and France and Canada, there are major movements that are gaining that are national. Some are regulatory, some are legislative, and so Google and Facebook have never faced this level of pressure from Europe, from Australia, from North America, and it's increasing through News Media Alliance here. There is more and more pressure. I have no doubt there will be more accommodation from the platforms, but whether the idea of getting license money, which I raised in a recent column, and license money talking about hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, similar to what local TV companies get through retransmission fees, that's what's on the table now as a new way, a new revenue source that would really change the nature of the industry.
Let me follow up on that with Mike. Mike, you, in addition to running a revenue successful newspaper, you're also unusual in that you're fairly indifferent to the Facebook Google debate. And you told us the other day that you don't devote a lot of energy to either the debate or implementation of strategies to capitalize on it. What's your point of view?
Well, let me make a distinction. We have never really viewed the interactions that were available for news publishers on Google and Facebook to be particularly worthwhile. We believe deeply in our own subscriber relationship and owning that subscriber relationship, and we've never had any interest deploying our content onto third-party platforms without any remuneration. It just didn't make any sense to us. I mean, to a certain extent, yes, you want to drive some traffic, and we do advertise on those platforms to try to drive traffic, but it just doesn't make any sense for us to transfer our subscription relationship to a third-party platform. We want to own that. Now, having said that, I am on the News Media Alliance board and have been very involved with the initiative to try to secure safe harbor legislation to enable news publishers to negotiate with Facebook and Google over compensation, and I am completely in favor of that avenue. And I think that first of all, they can afford it, and second of all, I think it's right. And so I'm very much on the side of that, but I am not really because I see no motivation for us to deploy our content on those platforms.
Yeah, I think that's such an important distinction, Mike. I mean, Facebook and Google to a lesser extent, but Facebook really and other social places have launched these initiatives that require a huge investment on the part of journalistic organizations. There's not often a paid component from the social team, and they expect you to put all this work in, and then they can be abandoned. So I think, it's so fascinating to me that you haven't gone down any of these paths, and you've wanted to own this relationship to an extent where you even built your own paywall, right?
Yes. So when we started back in 2011, we did our own engineering on our paywall, and so that we could have understand the relationship between the digital subscriber and the print subscriber, and have that all in one data record.
Do we have a question from the audience? Alex, do you have that question?
There's another one from JC Harp. Any ideas about the potential for more papers shifting to nonprofit structure like SCL? Salt Lake City.
Yeah. So Salt Lake City is an interesting example, and they're really just getting started. They were having a hard time, second paper in a city, and so even harder than many single dailies. The thinking there is right, and it's going to be tested, and it's going to be unfortunately further tested by COVID. The thinking is we need to run this as a business. We need to bring in all the revenue we can from circulation and advertising, including digital subscriptions, but they want to harness philanthropy as a new source of revenue. And again, this is math. If they can do whatever they can do for advertising and circulation, and bring in 5-10% of their budget through philanthropy locally, that is going to help soften the blow of advertising losses, print advertising losses, which will continue. And the fact of being nonprofit means they have a lower number to hit. So it should mean more people. There are a lot of companies looking at it, but it doesn't lessen at all the need to run it as a business and as a modern digital business. And I think that should be remembered.
Let's talk for a moment, if we can, folks, about the civic issue that underlies this discussion, and what a country and a world looks like in which daily newspapers are not what they once were, and which we haven't used one of the cliches of the moment, news deserts, where City Hall is not covered, there is no newspaper, there might be an entrepreneurial news site in that market. Right. Mike, are you concerned that the peril the newspaper's in is going to really affect our civic conversation?
Absolutely. How could you not be? All the things you point out are incredibly important, and it's important in the small towns as well as it is in the larger towns. I mean, to be honest, we haven't lost many large city newspapers yet. No predictions here, but we've lost the second paper in 2 market towns. but we really haven't lost any. Now, some of the more mundane civic reporting has probably been a victim of newsroom cuts, but for the most part, the newspaper is still there and they're paying attention. Where I think it's going to hit most immediately is these small communities, where we really will lose the local paper, and there isn't a broadcast station there. So a lot of times there isn't even a radio station there to fill in that void. So that's, I think that's the more problematic geography around that question.
Ken?
I think it's spreading, and Mike is definitely right that it has been less of a problem in metro areas by simple numbers. But we got to have recent examples, for instance, out of Cleveland, where we have a cutting of staff that is highly significant and major beats not covered. There's a story a couple days ago about in Providence, a fairly major city, no longer having an opinion function. This is not a potential problem. This is a problem that is existing across the country for years now, and it just gets worse and worse and worse. But it's really hard to measure. You can kind of measure it in voting numbers or other metrics that kind of tell the story. But there's no doubt this is a major problem in this democracy, and it's not just the U.S. Canada is actually worse off than we are. Western Europe and Latin America have the same problems.
And speaking of engagement, not civic engagement, but engagement here on our platform, I want to thank a couple of people watching. Stefan Kaplan for tagging so many people in, Jeff Jarvis for joining us, Linda Bernstein. Thank you guys for coming here and talking with us today, and keep sending us your questions. And back to you, Merrill.
And special thanks to David Boardman, who joined us, who runs the journalism program at Temple University and is a friend to probably everybody on this call. Ken, I want to ask you a little bit about the post-COVID world, if you will. You touched on it briefly, but it does seem like we're going to see a much contracted newspaper industry come fourth quarter. What are you saying about how the rest of 2020 actually looks?
Well, there are the wild cards of which forecast we believe and what happens with the openings, of course, and that's one of the greatest determinants of are the businesses going to operate locally and are they going to advertise. So we don't have an answer to that, but we know the condition of many of these companies going into it. We see the rolling, not just furloughs, but layoffs. So this making smaller of staffs is going to happen over and over again, week by week. And I don't expect much of it to come back. I think those FTI numbers I showed shows that even if there is this vaunted V-shaped recovery, it's not going to be a V-shaped recovery in loss. And what we have to figure out collectively, many, if not all the people on this broadcast know, is what's going to fill the hole in America, large and small, as we see the greater cratering of news media. It's happening. It was happening. It's now happening at a very fast rate. And especially if half of the American press, as I've written, falls into the hands of financial companies by the end of the year, which is a strong likelihood, what is going to replace them?
Well, Ken, you've decided what's going to replace it in your town. You've started something. I'm
going to be starting something, but that's only one model. I think we need more.
Tell us briefly about it.
Well, basically, I wrote about it in my column at the Neiman Journalism Lab at Harvard in the fall, and it's called Lookout Local. And basically, I have tried to apply what I have learned from dozens, if not hundreds, of smart people, what models work, and in terms of reader revenue, in terms of digital product, mobile product. And we are combining those ideas, and we will soon be announcing what we will be launching and where.
And Mike, what do you think of the entrepreneurial movement that Ken's startup is a part of as a way to solve the news desert or the shrinking newspaper problem?
Oh, Mike's muted. Yeah.
Yeah. I just want everybody to know I'm not controlling my muting. The master is. I think it's a tough road for the nonprofits. You know, we have a very successful one in Minnesota. It's called MinPost.
Right.
But, they started around the same time I got to the Star Tribune. They have a budget of about $3 million. So how much news reporting can you finance with $3 million? It's a big fundraising push for them just to get to that level. News gathering is expensive. And so I think as a supplementary activity, it can function, and in verticals it can function. But I just don't see it being able to cover the waterfront the way newspapers do, or news publishers do. I want to make one point just about, broadcasters are having problems right now as well. And we shouldn't ignore, we at least have half of our revenue coming from consumers. Local radio and local TV are 100% advertising driven. And if the advertising continues at the pace it is now through the full year, there's a crisis for those people as well. Now, they have an advantage. They're not as expensive operations to run as newspapers are. But nonetheless, this is not just a newspaper problem.
Right.
Alex?
And we have another question, and this is on the same point from Peter Kreisky. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Given the continuing expansion and importance of newspapers' direct relationship with readers, which we were just talking about, reinforced daily, what are you learning about your consumers to become ever more important to their lives? Mike?
Yeah, so Peter and I used to work together at Time Incorporated, so I think that was a football that he just tossed me there. But without any question, we have historic levels of digital engagement. We have unprecedented level of digital subscription. When the going got tough, the people came to the trusted source of news. And, you read a lot about trust in news and how it's diminishing. And without question, there's something to that. But as you get closer to the local, as you get closer to the people locally, the trust in news increases. So they're more trusting of the Star Tribune, not everybody, obviously, but than they are, say, of MSNBC or whether it's CNN or Fox News. So without question, this has been, in a way, a moment for us in terms of the consumers. And I believe at the end, we're going to come out of this with a stronger brand and a stronger market position than we went into it with. And as Ken said, it's accelerated us 3 years down the path probably, but we were going to lose that print revenue anyway. So if we can take advantage of this moment to make everything we can of our consumer relationship, I think we're going to be okay.
Ken?
Regional and national products is a breadth of coverage. So even we had the Trump bump, and we have all this attention to obviously what's been going on in Washington even before COVID, and now COVID has changed everything, we hope temporarily. If you look at the breadth of coverage of what people do in their full lives in terms of entertainment, in terms of family, in terms of sports, the better news products have gotten broader. And they understand that news, basically what is new each day, where it comes from, is maybe the core of it. But the more you can understand, and of course we can understand so much through digital information, and serve those needs in a wider way, opens up all kinds of more digital subscription and advertising possibilities. This, in a nutshell, is the strategy of the New York Times, with crosswords and parenting and cooking. But it's also, I think, the future of those successful, especially metros across the country, dealing with people's lives, helping them in their lives in general with what digital can uniquely do.
Alex?
Yeah, so we have a question from Jeff Jarvis, I think narrowing down on what you were just talking about, that the contraction of newspapers. What's the lifespan for print now, post-COVID?
I've been saying for a while, and I think it's true, and Mike just reiterated about the acceleration. Clearly, where this is going is Sunday print in many markets, and digital throughout the week and through the night, however much we're up with COVID, we'll see. But Sunday print is very durable. It kind of fits lifestyle. People want more relaxation as long as it's a real product. And in the markets, and I know many times I've talked with Mike, he shocked me about 2 years ago, and he said, well, we added actually a couple of pages to the Sunday paper because they did the research, and for many of us who get very thin Sunday papers now, the Star Tribune could hurt you if it hits you on Sunday. So I think it's really important that you see Sunday plus digital, and then we're going to see some interim there where it's going to be Wednesday and Sunday. And for the strongest, I know, as Mike is saying, 7-day print still works in Minneapolis, and it will. I don't think it will in 2030, but it has a long time span.
Thanks, Ken.
I'll just jump in there since it was Jeff asking the question, and here again, another time anchor. Jeff and I were partners in crime and starting Entertainment Weekly many years ago. So hi, Jeff. And Jeff didn't toss me a softball. So I do want to say that I basically agree with Ken. The only thing I will say is that when I first got to the Star Tribune, I remember reading stories that newspapers wouldn't exist in 2 and 3 years. So I think it's a little bit like sci-fi novels that always think the future is coming faster than it is. I think there's quite a bit of runway still for print. We are very, very dedicated to 7-day print. We don't want to break that reader habit even one day of the week. We are dedicated to the bundle that Ken described, which is we're all about the community, and that includes arts and sports and music. We have 2 music critics still. We have a film critic, which Jeff was a film critic. So in any event, in honor of that, we've retained our film critic at the Star Tribune. But I think with that entire package, if you do the whole thing, you can make yourself indispensable.
I want to thank everyone for what has been a great discussion. I want to get to some closing remarks before Alex and I do a little debrief. Last week, we had as our guest Emily Ramshaw, who's starting a publication called The 19th about gender politics and policy. And that, by definition, is a positive thing because here's an entrepreneur starting something new. This show, obviously, is a bit more sober. We wanted the sober, straightforward, not particularly positive Ken to be matched by somebody in the business who actually is pulling it off. But I do want to end with both of you giving a little bit more perspective on what you might suggest to entrepreneurs and publishers watching us today about what they ought to be doing to deal with the current crisis. Ken, you first?
Sure. I think if I summed it up in one word, it'd be relationship. The relationship and really understanding both your reader customers, your potential reader customers, and the same thing in advertisers is the absolute key to that. We can do that. We've been able to do that much better year by year by year. Then being able to take that and act on it. And part of it is resources and part of it is creativity. If you separate out right now, just using one example, if you separate out right now the newspapers who have met the challenge and really helped their communities with very specific COVID questions of what's happening in my community at the hospitals and the nurses and the doctors, and where can I shop and where can I get my Instacart groceries, and those that haven't, that tells you the whole story. This is what the promise is. The promise is still there. It still just needs to be fulfilled in this decade ahead.
Thanks, Ken. Before we get to Mike, I want to say hello to someone attending, I believe, from Charleston, South Carolina. That's Kara Erickson, who some of you know. Hi, Kara. Thanks for joining us. Mike, your wisdom on how to make it in this environment.
Yeah, Ken mentioned reaching out, and we're doing that not only with advertisers, offering them programs literally for free to try to help some of the small businesses get through this time period. We have strong relationships with all the small businesses. That is the basis of our advertising. We're reaching out to other publications who maybe we could help during this period and maybe find some ways that down the road that would lead to partnerships with some smaller publishers, both regionally and vertically. So I do think it's important to outreach right now and see if you can help the broader community. Of course, we're trying to help in every way we can to the broader community, but I think that'll be appreciated and remembered when we get through this.
Mike, thank you very much. I want to also say hello before we break to Bill Siemering, who's watching from Philadelphia and is the founder of National Public Radio and one of the great media people in our country. Thanks for joining us, Bill. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Ken. Alex, the final thought?
This has been so great. Thank you both for joining us. And, come back. Come do this with us again.
Next time a happy hour.
And can I just say, buy a subscription?
Thank you, Mike. Alex and I are going to continue with a short debrief, but farewell to Ken and Mike, and we'll hope to see you again soon. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks.
We covered a lot of ground, Alex, I think.
Yeah, man. I think it's fascinating. Mike's strategy, it wasn't obvious necessarily 10 years ago when he came to the Minneapolis Star Tribune, at least it wouldn't have been to me, that owned audience, you couldn't deflect and go to pure social, you couldn't go third party, you had to really own that audience, go for loyalists who were going to convert into paid subscribers. That has become a very clear way to go forward now, but Mike certainly had vision on that, don't you think?
He did. He had a great market. He's blessed with a wealthy owner. Wealthy ownership is very important at this moment, as we can see in Los Angeles and Boston and in Minneapolis. But he brought a magazine industry. He mentioned Time Inc. a couple of times. He brought magazine industry marketing to the newspaper industry as well. Newspaper industry has not been blessed with world-class marketing, and it was lucky enough to get one in Minneapolis in Mike. That's really important. You know a fair amount about magazines, I know, Alex, and the importance of marketing in magazines and what's learned from that is a critical lesson here.
Yeah, he had said to us earlier, a couple days ago, that bringing from glossies not only actual talent, which was so important, but kind of the whole packaging and including events and things like that, which are obviously on hold right now. But the marketing packaging of magazines he's brought to print newspapers, which seems like a very innovative way to go about it.
Yeah, and you and I are generally positive people, and we try in our work to be positive with entrepreneurs we're working with. And the general takeaway of most people around the country, especially those in the business, is the horrible situation newspapers are in, and what a terrible blow it is to our civic dialogue. We want to be positive, and it was great having somebody who's pulled it off and has lessons to share, like Mike. But the fact is, we're losing newspapers all the time. I think we're going to lose a bunch over the next 6 months. And it's going to be up to people like Ken, actually, who's doing it in California, and the kind of people we work with to fill those voids, don't you think?
Absolutely. And I think, Ken gave that very sad breakdown of what he thinks the future is and how many we're going to lose. But I also think that Mike protected his newsroom all these years, and a lot of places haven't. And without the journalists, you can't build anything out of this. Journalists are at the core of this, and that's so important for us at the News Project. Almost everyone that you've hired comes from an editorial background. We know that you cannot create anything of value without that really wonderful content. And, the future of ghost newspapers sounds incredibly depressing.
Yeah.
So.
Well, we've had a lot of really interesting people pass through the show today. We mentioned Peter Kreisky before, who's one of the great thinkers in media. The former publisher of USA Today, Larry Kramer, joined the show. Jeff Jarvis, who's obviously one of the great digital thinkers in the world, and his role as professor at the CUNY Journalism School. So we're thrilled to have that level of people with us, and many just ordinary media followers. And we hope you'll continue to join us. We're going to be talking about television journalism in one episode in the coming weeks. We have some exciting guests to be announcing. Hopefully we'll be able to have people as good as those we had today. And Alex, great conversation.
Yes, thank you so much, Merrill. This has been a great project. I'm excited for next week.
Me too. Thanks, everyone, for joining. We really appreciate it. And please tune in next Thursday and keep an eye on social media for who our coming guests will be. Thank you and have a good evening.